Read to me, Oliver. Okay, so this is Chapter 10 of Stories of America, Volume 2, From the Oregon Trail to the Present Day. The chapter is... what is it? The Right to Vote, Chapter 10. I hope you enjoy. Please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more. Okay. Chapter 10, The Right to Vote. Perhaps my readers have heard the curious term suffrage when studying the history of this great country of ours. Though it sounds like a terribly hard thing that no one would desire, it was actually one of the most sought-after privileges in the land. You see, the word suffrage comes from the Latin suffragium, meaning to vote for or to extend support. Those seeking the privilege of suffrage were seeking the right to vote. Here is the story of two women suffragettes, Elizabeth Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was born in Johnstown, New York in 1815. Her father, Judge Daniel Cady, was a well-known and much-respected lawyer and judge. The little girl, as she grew up, delighted to be in her father's office, to listen to what was said there, and to chatter away in her own style when she had a chance. She was bright and quick and would sit silent in her corner, listening to those who came in to seek her father on business. When women came in and talked about how unjust the laws were toward them, the little girl listened more eagerly still. Flora Campbell came to the judge one day and told her story. Mrs. Campbell had bought a farm with her own money. Later, she married, and when her husband died, he wrote in his will that he was giving the farm to his son, a lazy, good-for-nothing child who was mean to his mother. Mrs. Campbell wanted to know what she could do about this injustice. She had bought the farm, didn't it belong to her? Judge Cady explained that when she got married, the state of New York declared that all she owned, all she earned, and even her children became her husband's property. He could do with them as he wished, and there was nothing she could do about it. Elizabeth's sympathetic soul grew sad and angry at the same time as she heard Mrs. Campbell's story. Little Elizabeth had 4 sisters and 1 brother, and her father seemed to regard the boy more highly than all 5 of his girls. When his son died, he could not be consoled, though he had all these girls left. "I wish you were a boy," he said with a sigh to Elizabeth. "Then I will be a boy, and I will do all my brother did," she replied. She decided that courage and learning were 2 points in which boys showed themselves superior, and she resolved to show she had these. Determined that none of the boys should be ahead of her, she studied mathematics, Latin, and Greek, knowledge then usually thought beyond the scope of girls. And she showed her ability by winning a Greek Testament as a prize for her studies. No doubt her young heart swelled with joy at this triumph over the boys of her class. She afterwards graduated at the head of the class in the Academy of Johnstown. So far she had kept her word, but here her course was stayed. There was not a college in the country at that time who would take girl students, and her indignation was great to find that boys who had been much below her in the academy could go to college, while she, because she happened to be a girl, was kept out. This seemed very unfair, and when she remembered what she had said in her father's office about the injustice of the laws toward women, she grew to feel very bitter about the one-sided way in which the world was managed. She made up her mind to fight against this injustice, and the fight which she begun, she never gave up while she lived. She was by no means alone in this fight. There were many people of the same way of thinking, but Mrs. Stanton was the most active and energetic in the work of calling together and organizing those interested in women's rights. It was very largely due to her that in July 1848, the Women's Rights Convention in the world was called together at Seneca Falls, New York. What the members of this convention had in mind was to begin a campaign to make women the equals of men before the law. Mrs. Stanton went farther than them all, demanding that they should include suffrage for women. At first, Mrs. Stanton took almost alone in this demand, being supported by only one other person at the convention, Frederick Douglass, a former slave. Her husband strongly objected to her idea as unwise, but she was in dead earnest, and she did what she had never done before. She stated her views in public, and with a power she did not know she possessed. Douglas, an able and eloquent speaker, strongly supported her, and between them they eventually won the support for all the convention delegates, who passed a resolution declaring their favor of women's suffrage. The report of what was done in this convention excited great attention through the country. To demand for women the right to vote, it was preposterous. Anything so utterly absurd had never happened before. The bulk of the newspapers looked upon it as only a matter of laughter. Such a reaction discouraged many, but not Mrs. Stanton. She set to work vigorously, using her newfound powers of oratory and lecturing in all directions. 2 years later, Susan B. Anthony, who had ridiculed the demand for the ballot on first hearing of it, changed her views and joined Mrs. Stanton as a friend and fellow worker. Miss Stanton had received an excellent education from her father. Miss Anthony had received an excellent education from her father, and at the age of 17, she entered upon her life duties as a teacher. There was one thing, however, that the youthful teacher protested against from the start: the low wages paid and the discrimination in favor of men. She had certainly some reason to complain of underpayment, in view of the fact that she received but $1.50 per week. But what principally roused Miss Anthony's indignation was to see men whom she felt to be much inferior to her education and ability as teachers receiving 3 times her salary. It was this injustice, as she deemed it, that led her to first lift her voice in public. You see, there are 2 ways to approach a desired change. You may sit back, do nothing, and hope the change might happen, or you may take every opportunity to spread the word and let other people know about the change you're desiring. Susan B. Anthony chose to spread the word, and she began to take an active part in reform movements as a public speaker. At that time, the popular prejudice against women taking part in public work was very strong, but Miss Anthony was one of those valiant souls that dared custom and criticism by boldly presenting her views before some women's meetings. She was helped to break down the wall that stood between women and the public platform. During the Civil War, Miss Anthony was very active, lecturing from city to city upon vital questions of the day, and in association with Miss Stanton, sent petitions through the country encouraging the abolition of slavery. Miss Anthony gained as much facility as a public speaker. She never indulged in flowers of speech, but she was earnest, direct, and businesslike, always talking to the point, always sincere, and usually convincing. Her energy was untiring, her good humor inexhaustible, and she was always quick to see and seize an opportunity. Like the woman's cruse of oil, she never ran dry in the theme of women's rights. She even took advantage of every opportunity to deliver impromptu speeches on the subject. Once, when icebound on Mississippi in a steamboat, she broke the monotony by organizing a meeting in the cabin and addressing the passengers on her favorite topic. Her unceasing work was not without effect. Gradually, the people of the country grew accustomed to the idea of women's suffrage. It gained a large support among men and became established in greater or less measure in many of the states. But Miss Anthony was not satisfied with suffrage in only many of the states. She wanted to see it guaranteed in every state. For years she sought to rouse the people of this country to demand an amendment to the Constitution, making women's suffrage a part of the fundamental law of the whole country. Miss Anthony said that her work was like plowing. She was simply preparing the way for a plentiful harvest. Neither Elizabeth Stanton nor Susan B. Anthony lived to see the fruit of their labor. But eventually the harvest did come. The 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote, was added to the Constitution in 1920. So thank you for watching, and please leave a like and subscribe below. I'll read the next chapter and keep reading.